Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming along today. As I mentioned, I'm Rachel. I'm a community champion with Sustainable Merton. By night and then by day, I work for the Energy Saving Trust in the transport section. So today I'll be talking a bit about how sustainable is working from home, which working from home is something that a lot of us, myself included, have had to quite rapidly adapt to. So we'll start with some calculations, sort of quite high level calculations of the carbon footprint of working in home versus at the office. Discuss a little bit about the nuances and considerations in that. Share some ideas as to how you can further reduce your carbon footprint at home. And then I'd very much like to hear from you guys as to what your thoughts and ideas are around working from home too. So I shall kick off with a video. Ooh. Okay, great. I shall kick off with a video that just goes through some of the calculations. Hopefully this is coming up for you now. Has that come up yet, Amy?
Yeah, that's on the screen now.
Perfect. Okay. So the first scenario that they went through was the lone home worker. So that's just one person working from home instead of the office, and there's no one else that would have been using the house usually. So here we've got for the heating and the additional 25% extra time being at home, you get to 0.6 tons of CO2, plus your PC and your lighting equipment in the office, and then plus your sundries like your boiling the kettle for cups of coffee and tea, and then in total you get to 0.7 tons of CO2 per person per year. And then for a home worker at home, but there are other people in the household that would be at home anyway, regardless of whether that home worker was working from home or in the office. That would just be the electricity usage slight uplift. So that would be 0.1 tons of CO2 per home per year. And then for the office-based worker, you have the heating, lighting, electricity, and things for the office, so that's 0.13 tons of CO2 per person. But then, of course, you do have the commute to the office. So this example used a 10-mile round trip in a diesel car, which gives you 0.8 tons of CO2 per person per annum. Although the lady presenting this particular video did in fact have an electric car, so didn't produce any CO2 from her commute. And then I think, yeah, and then she mentioned some of the other considerations already in the video, things about traveling by bus or by train, and the renewable energy that might be at home. And that was essentially all that was covered in the video. So I will now switch back over to sharing the presentation, please. Okay, hopefully that has come through for you. So here's a quick graph just to illustrate those figures that were in the video of the three scenarios. That was the lone home worker at 0.7 tonnes of CO2 per person per annum, 0.1 tonnes for a home worker where there were other people in the house anyway, and then 0.8 tonnes of CO2 for the office worker. Now, overall, home working does come in with a lower carbon footprint than working from an office. I was surprised to see that the lone home worker wasn't actually that much under the office worker, but clearly there are a lot of considerations to take into consideration when calculating the carbon footprint, which will change how this scenario looks. So I'd quite like to dig into some of these a little bit more. Of course, there was the quite noticeable difference between whether there were any other household members that would have been at home anyway. And then, of course, the commute, as was picked up a little bit in the video, that calculation used a diesel car and a 10-mile round trip, whereas other people would or could be commuting by public transport, walking, cycling, an electric car with a renewable energy tariff. These would all have a much lower carbon footprint, so would change how that calculation comes out. Then, of course, the energy supply at the home and at the office. Switching to a renewable energy supply at home will lower your carbon footprint, although I would like to highlight that there can be different shades of green when it comes to green energy tariffs that you can get. And of course, our energy usage does vary with the season. So in winter, we'll be using more heating than in the summer, so that calculation will look different in the winter. And in fact, WSP UK did an analysis on this and found that working from home may only be more sustainable in the summer because of this impact of heating lots of individual workers' homes rather than one office block. And the situation changes, of course, in other countries. Countries such as the US rely much more heavily on air conditioning in the summer than the UK. Air conditioning is more energy intensive than heating. So the US's summertime calculations will look a lot more like the UK wintertime calculations as well. And then, of course, everyone being remote, we may see an increase in home deliveries, for instance, shipping supplies to individual workers rather than one big delivery going to a central office. So just some other things that will impact the calculation. So whilst overall working from home does have a lower carbon footprint, I would be cautious of something like the rebound effect coming into play. To illustrate this effect, I'll use the example of an email, which has the carbon footprint, it still has a carbon footprint of more than 0, as you do require electricity and server capacity to write, send, and read it. So an email actually has 1/10 the carbon footprint of a letter. But if we ended up sending 60 times as many emails as we would have done in letters, which is very easily done, then you would actually not have made any carbon footprint saving. So a low carbon technology such as emails, we've ended up using it a lot more than the letters. So overall, our carbon footprint has increased, not decreased. So this is an example of where, even though something is a low carbon option, we do need to still be mindful of how much we're using it or what else we're doing around it. And so for the example of an email, some things you can do to help minimize the impact of this would be blocking spam, not sending unnecessary emails, and not needlessly copying people into emails. So of course, more broadly, in saving and continuing to reduce your carbon footprint of working from home, even though it is lower than working from an office, there are still other things that we can do to get it down further. So for instance, only using central heating at certain points in the day or in certain rooms, for instance, the office you're working in. Of course, turning the thermostat down by a degree and dressing more warmly, unplugging chargers and not using things on standby, turning lights off when leaving the room, switching to LED bulbs, boiling only the amount of water that you need. For instance, if you're only making 1 cup of tea. And then in this new era of webinars and video calls, you can try only turning on your video when it's necessary, and maybe even blurring your background, which is a function on Teams, and I'm sure other platforms have something too, and that'll help save bandwidth and energy. You can also look at the optimal energy saving settings on your computer. Setting up your desk in a space with lots of natural light to avoid as much use of artificial light as possible. Draft-proofing windows and doors. Using a smart meter, which shows you how much energy you are consuming and can help encourage a reduction in energy consumption, because it can be quite motivating to see that number go down as you put in place certain actions. And then cooking wise, try batch cooking, as reheating food using a microwave is more energy efficient than using an oven or cooking from scratch every time. In the winter, you can get up regularly from your desk, maybe stretch or exercise to help get that circulation going. And in the summer, resist buying fans and try opening the windows to cool down the room. Hopefully you don't suffer from hay fever on that. And then some other ideas would be maybe a pledge to have some meat-free lunches, or not using private or public transport on certain days of the week. So it's kind of enough talking from me. I'm very keen to hear a little bit more about what your guys' thoughts are on working from home and some ideas that you guys have. So I'd like to open up to the floor with some of these prompt questions. Do you think your carbon footprint is lower by working from home? What are you doing to help reduce your carbon footprint further whilst working from home? Is remote working the way forward?
Shall I start?